The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. Today we're discussing Penance, which is the second episode of the second season of Picard. I'm Father Cory Sticha, taking over for Dom Bettinelli this week, and joining me today is Jimmy Akin. How's it going, Jimmy?
Howdy, Father.
You can get your own very own Secrets of Star Trek t-shirts, mouse pads, and more by visiting sqpn.com/merch. Let me also take a moment to tell you about another show here on the Star Quest network that you're sure to enjoy, American Catholic History. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/history. Also, continue to listen to the end where we have some listener feedback on our recent episode about generations. So, Jimmy, would you like to give a recap of Penance?
Last time, Picard ordered the Stargazer to self-destruct after his peace mission to the Borg went sideways. He and the rest of the gang wake up in a rewritten version of our timeline where Earth is the home of a totalitarian government that is built on galactic domination and has killed and subjugated multiple species. As the team pieces this together and starts getting the band back together, they learn that it's Eradication Day, a public holiday in which enemies of the state are publicly eradicated. Scheduled to be executed is the last Borg Queen. So this is the end of the Borg Collective. But she informs the team that time has been rewritten, starting with something that happened in 2024 in Los Angeles. She also alludes to a Watcher who will be there to help them. Picard decides to fly around the sun to go back in time, but they need to take the Borg Queen with them so she can do the calculations. Picard pretends to go through with the public execution of the Borg Queen in order to buy time, and after a team effort, everybody gets beamed up to the La Sirena. But before they can leave to fly around the sun, security forces beam onto the ship, capture everyone, and announce that Picard will be executed as a traitor, killed in the act of rescuing a Borg, which is not a good thing in any timeline, and especially not in this totalitarian one. The end.
So it's interesting. Q is very different in this, in kind of my opinion. He's very different than we normally see him. Usually he's almost kind of a dark court jester. I would call him.
He's more serious in this than he frequently is.
Yeah, very much so. He mentions yesterday's Enterprise. He names drops that episode, and that's really kind of a hint of what has happened, why everything has changed. That there was some historical event got switched. That, yesterday's Enterprise, of course, for those who might not remember, is the Enterprise C ends up in the Enterprise D's time frame, coming from the battle that ends up creating the peace between the Klingons and the Federation. And so it switches where the Klingon War is still going on.
Yeah, there's also another kind of revisit, and at this point in Star Trek history, so many things have been done. Almost every episode is going to revisit themes from some previous episode. But there's another one, just like last time I mentioned, we're kind of redoing Tapestry,
right,
where Q shows Picard what could have been instead of what is. And we've got that going on here too, but this time it's got a dash of Mirror, Mirror from the original series thrown in, because we have this dark alternate timeline. And so we've got to see our familiar, nice, fluffy, weak Federation, sloppy, let's all have a hug and be together in our togetherness. Right. Federation people who have to now play act as totalitarians in order to pass and achieve their goals. And we've seen that a bunch. I mean, ever since the original series, we have seen the only one that we really didn't see it in was Next Gen. But in every other Star Trek series, we have had visits to the mirror universe where our friendly heroes have to play unfriendly villains in order to survive. And we end up spending some time realizing how uncomfortable that is for them. And sometimes they have a lot of hand-wringing about What are they going to do? Are they really going to do this evil thing in order to fit in or not? And this time we don't have very much of that, which is good because we've seen that. We've done that. Right. This is old hat. Just do the evil thing and get on with it.
Right.
And so I think they handled that okay, although and I don't mind that we're in this dark totalitarian universe or version of the timeline, but I have this, having watched enough of this, including on different science fiction shows, including Battlestar Galactica, where you have a dystopian timeline. People in Hollywood think they're being so deep. When they do this kind of thing, it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna be making a bold statement about our politics today and how evil Republicans are and stuff. And it's like, dude, there's nothing here. These are just bad people. This is just a bad timeline. You're not making any deep social statement here.
Right.
If you think you are, you're projecting. And you do not understand the people that you think you're critiquing.
Exactly. And this, to be clear, this isn't Mirror episode. This is, as they say later on, this is their timeline, the same timeline, just tweaked with one event. And of course, it's always one event. It's always one thing that causes the change back in 2024. So of course, where are they going to? Modern day, basically.
Also, I'm not really impressed with because at first they are talking like, oh, we're in an alternate reality. And then it's like, no, this is our reality that's been rewritten. It's like, dude, same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing. There's not really a distinction between an alternate reality and a branching timeline. If it's similar at all to you, then there was very likely some branching point. And they even have in Star Trek, they have established that with the mirror universe. If you look back in the Star Trek Enterprise episodes Through a Glass Darkly, when they introduce the mirror universe, they flash back to the moment of first contact with the Vulcans, and they've got like James, whatever his name is, who played Zephram Cochrane. James Cromwell. They've got him back, and instead of and they reuse footage from the movie First Contact, but they cut it together in such a way that now, instead of extending his hand to greet the Vulcans peacefully, Zephram Cochrane shoots them.
Yeah.
And that's what leads to the mirror timeline.
Yeah, that's kind of a clever way to do that. This one, I don't know. We'll have to see how it goes forward, but so far it's just kind of like, okay, fine. There's one major event that happened somewhere in time.
Yeah.
One thing that's kind of interesting is there's talk here. Picard mentions just really quickly that Q does not look well. He says doesn't look well, and later describes him as unstable, not quite sane, which I think you could define Q that way normally anyways, but
and that's part of the issue, because they don't make it obvious that Q is unwell. I mean, I'm watching John Delancey's performance as Q, and his performance is different, but he seems more serious. He doesn't seem visibly unwell. That's just something Picard kind of declares.
Right.
What I find interesting about Q, and I find this true not just in this episode, but across all of his different appearances, is yes, Q is annoying, but he is not as untrustworthy as people claim.
Right.
And this really goes all the way through. I mean, Q will show up and there will be trouble, and yes, he will be related to it somehow, but Picard and everybody else just leaps to, you are somehow causing this, and you are untrustworthy, and Q, but if you really look at what Q tells them, he doesn't lie.
Right.
He may be annoying. He may be a source of difficulty at times, but he doesn't lie to them.
Right.
And he's really not as untrustworthy as people think. And so in this case, when he's first showing Picard around, look at your glorious, devastated totalitarian hell world, Picard is like, what have you done? And he makes this aside where he says, show them a world of their own making, and they blame you for it.
Right.
And he's right. He's not the one that has done this. It was something back in 2024. He also says, I'm a suture in the wound. I'm holding this all together. This would be even worse if it wasn't for me, in essence. Yeah. And I have no doubt he's telling the truth about that. He's trying to help here. But Picard doesn't give him the cred. And you'd think after all this time, Picard would learn that, yeah, Q doesn't actually lie. He may be annoying, but he doesn't actually lie to you. He's not as untrustworthy as you think.
Right.
And then he hits Picard, which is awesome.
Yeah. I was going to comment about that you can tell that Q is just as tired of Picard is with Q's games. Q is just as tired with Picard, and he smacks him, which is very different from when he met Sisko. But
they're not in a boxing match. This is like Picard is yelling at Q, and Q just backhands him when he's had enough.
That was pretty incredible. And just kind of quick thought about Q doesn't look well. It kind of interesting though when you look at Patrick Stewart and John Delancey next to each other. They're only 8 years apart in age. John Delancey's 74, Patrick Stewart's 82. John Delancey has aged much better than Patrick Stewart has, at least just as you see on screen. But so it's kind of interesting that Q is the one who's supposedly not well. But yeah, Q doesn't, he's got a much stronger temper than he usually does. And it was kind of almost refreshing to see Q basically shut Picard up at that point. One thing Q says as they're going through the tour of Picard's house, including the study with all his trophies.
The study is awesome. It's I mean, in a dark way.
Yeah. But Q says that he's offering atonement and forgiveness. And of course, Picard's like, well, I don't know what for. And the response is, I think you know. So whatever that is something that'll be revealed going forward, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's going to be something like from his past, maybe his childhood or something like that.
Yeah. Since
the tour around the house is pretty amazing. So at the end of last episode, we saw the glass room, which they still haven't really told us what it was used for, so I don't know what to call it. But the glass room that Picard and his mother would use as their private little world. We see that, and it's like in disrepair, and then we see that Laris isn't there, but he's got this synth named Harvey, who's his butler, and then he looks at a painting of himself in a black uniform, which is, like a sinister version of a Starfleet uniform. This time we get an extensive tour of the place, and he's got all these Romulan slaves working for him in the kitchen. And we go into his private study, and there are skulls on, not only are there weapons all over the walls,
right,
and instead of a picture of the Enterprise, there is a picture over the mantle of a ship that's kind of like the Enterprise, but it's blasting everything in sight.
Yeah.
And we later learned that his most famous ship was not the Enterprise. It was called the World Razor.
Right.
As in to raise something to the ground. And then, but the main thing is there are all these skulls on pedestals, and the first one we see is a Ferengi skull. And so it turns out Ferengis have bones in their ears, which allows us to tell it's Ferengi. But it's like, okay, that's kind of horrifying to see that, because the Ferengi, as annoying as they are sort of lightweights. They're not really a threat to humanity. Sure. And so we know that Picard has killed Ferengi, even though they're not really a threat to humanity. Then there's a Borg skull that still has its biomechanical implants, but no flesh. And then there's a Cardassian skull and a Klingon skull, and what we learn is a Vulcan skull, and there are others. And Q starts giving us a tour of them, and he identifies the Cardassian skull as Gul Dukat, who Picard killed. And he introduces the Klingon skull as General Martok, who Picard killed. And he introduces the Vulcan skull as Sarek, who Picard killed on the steps of the Vulcan Science Academy in front of Amanda and Spock.
Yep.
And it's like, wow, this is horrifyingly dark.
Yeah, and he tells us that Gul Dukat is the reason why Picard has a synthetic body now, is because Gul Dukat must have wounded him so severely that he needed to have his body replaced. So that ties that in why this version of Picard is also a
robot.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that's interesting is, I kind of complained last episode that Picard is not the same Picard that we've known, and it's kind of been a complaint throughout the entire series, but. You see flashes of the confident, resolute Picard in General Picard, but of course he's much more cruel. He's very much a evil version of Picard, but we still see the flashes of the Picard we like, where he's actually confident and takes charge and stuff like that. And we see him at one point. Picard is watching some of the hollow recordings of his speeches, and he says a human galaxy is a safe galaxy. So you get the idea of what this totalitarian regime is about.
Yeah, and that we hear other people say that too. At one point, we're kind of flying over a city skyline. It looks like San Francisco, and we see a giant holographic statue of a man whose the title on the statue says his name is Adam Sung. And he's playing so this is another iteration of the Sung dynasty played by Brent Spiner. And even though he's not in the credits, we hear Brent Spiner's voice as Adam Sung saying a safe galaxy is a human galaxy. And so this is apparently a common societal slogan, and I don't know, maybe Adam Sung was the one who introduced it.
It could be, but the reason why Picard is going to San Francisco is because he's been called to the presidential palace by President Annika Hansen.
Yeah, so we get to catch up with Seven and what she's been doing, and she basically wakes up in a bed and is stumbling around in the morning as you do, and then she looks in the mirror and sees she doesn't have her Borg implants. She's just a normal human woman. And her Alexa refers to her when it wakes her up as Annika instead of as Seven. And I like when she realizes she doesn't have her Borg implant, she's like, this is impossible. And she's looking in the mirror and she says, like, okay, sanity rationality check. And she whips out some lipstick and writes Euler's identity on the mirror. It's E to the I pi plus 1 equals 0. And this is a very famous identity in mathematics. It's named after the mathematician Leonard Euler. And so I like the fact they took the time to look up a real world formula that's kind of central to some of the foundations of modern mathematics that they could use for her to use as a sanity rationality check. And so she rededuces Euler's identity in lipstick on the mirror and concludes she's sane.
Yep. Yeah. She also does a sense check where she smells the candle. She puts her hand over the flame to feel it. So she realizes this is real life. This isn't a dream. This isn't a hologram. This is real life.
Yeah,
something's
she says
really going on here.
I like the candle is self-lighting, just like we have today self-lighting light bulbs, so that when the pizza guy comes to your door, they light up automatically for him. And she's got a self-lighting candle. And she smells it and concludes, well, you can't smell in a dream, therefore this is not a dream. I'm not sure that that's true, that you can't smell in a dream. I'm pretty sure dogs do, and I don't know, maybe humans do too. But anyway, she concludes that because she could smell this candle, she's not dreaming.
Yeah, so as she's going with this, her husband comes in, who's her aide as well, and identifies her as the president of the Confederation.
Yeah, he doesn't even get a name. He's just the Confederation magistrate.
Exactly.
But he's in his little military Mao-like uniform, and he keeps calling her darling. And it's interesting. I think there's a reference here, and I haven't looked up the details to see exactly, but I think they're playing on the fact that Jeri Ryan, the actress who plays Seven, was married to a politician who then got caught in like a sex scandal. And I haven't gone back and revisited the details of that. I remember when it was originally in the news, but I think they're playing on the fact that by having Seven married to a politician here and being the president, I think they're somehow riffing on the fact that in real life, Jerry Ryan was married to a politician and it didn't go well.
Okay, yeah. So she was married to an investment banker turned politician by the name of Jack Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
So he went off to do his Tom Clancy. I mean, no,
presumably.
Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, but that was only for about 8 years. But yeah, that's a good way to think about that. They're kind of playing off that. But he's not the most likable character. He's kind of
he's an unsympathetic totalitarian.
Exactly. But he gets her.
Although he's not a mustache twirling villain. He's kind of I kind of got the sense he's sort of like a nebbish. He's just kind of an ineffectual guy who's not super bad. He's just doing what he can in the situation he finds himself in. He's
a functionary. I mean, his job is to keep her on task, to keep, make sure the speech gets written. You see the whole speech about Earth's merciful power, and things like that, and making sure that she's where she needs to be and chasing after her as she teleports across the city to different places. At one point, she says that she wants to have an update from the war front, and he offers to call General Sisko.
Mm-hmm. So we know he ended up okay, sort of, in this dark universe.
Well, and there's question, is this Ben Sisko or Jake Sisko?
Oh, well, that's true. I assume it's Ben Sisko.
Yeah, I did too, but I saw online someone kind of commented that this is old enough, long enough after DS9 that it could have been Jake, because we don't know anything about that. Hopefully that's something they'll kind of play with a little bit other than just have this little one-line throw out there. But as she's... Sorry.
No, well, I think we were just going to say she insists on talking to Colonel, she learns his rank is Cristobal Rios, who is not in charge of the Stargazer. Instead, he's apparently the chief strategist for the final raising of Vulcan, which is currently in progress. And he's in his ship. She's just guessed that if I woke up in this new world, maybe everybody from the Stargazer did. And that's actually something that I don't know if they're going to deal with, because there were presumably hundreds of people on the Stargazer, and we're really just connecting up the Picard crew. Right. Picard and Seven and Rios and Agnes and Elnor and Rafi. What happened to those other hundreds of people that were on the Stargazer? Did they wake up too and keep their memories, or did they not? Or I don't know if they're going to answer that question for us. And there are different ways they could answer it. They could say Q only brought over the consciousnesses of these people, but I don't know if they're going to answer it. But Seven guesses that if she has her memories of the other timeline, that Rios would too, and that other members of their group would. And so she starts talking to Rios over a secure channel, but they don't know if they can trust each other. Right. And so because she hasn't confirmed her hypothesis, so she has to broach the subject very carefully. And she says, like Colonel Rios, don't worry, this is a completely secure channel. I need accurate information about what's been going on. So if anything unusual has been going on, you should feel perfectly free to let me know.
Yeah, it did a good job with that. They really did a good job of just kind of like, let's get the hint out there, like, okay, things aren't what they seem. And of course, he immediately goes Seven, and you can see her just collapse. Okay, we're good.
Also, I like how at one point, they're struggling to figure out what's going on around them, and they need, because like this is Eradication Day, and Picard has been told that, but Seven has not. She doesn't know what's going on. She just knows there's this speech coming up, and she doesn't know what Eradication Day is. And her factotum husband is starting to figure out that she is thinking about something other than today's events. Right. And he questions, shouldn't we really be doing what we're here to do today? And she has another greatly written line, because this is the point where the audience needs an exposition dump. We need to be told what is going on. And Seven needs to be told what is going on, but she needs to ask it in a way that seems natural. And so she says to her husband, well, why don't you tell me what our priorities today are, and then I will tell you if you have the right priorities.
Yeah.
Which is a great way to ask for an exposition dump.
Exactly. So we learn about Elimination Day, what it's all about and everything there. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. I should mention that Rios is on La Serena. He's back on La Serena instead of, like you mentioned, he's not on the Stargazer, but he is on La Serena, which we'll hear that later. Alone. Yeah. He doesn't have anybody else, any other crew members on the ship. And he's jumped right into the middle of the battle. So they said the way they express it is they'd set up some kind of trick to draw the Vulcan fleet out after him. And that's when he wakes up, is when they first attack him. And then the rest of his fleet comes in and wipes him out. But then he gets recalled to Earth by Seven. Meanwhile, as all this is going on, Raffi and Elnor, they wake up in Okinawa, and Elnor's a rebel who helped blow up 5 buildings.
Right. He's apparently part of an alien underground, and they are fighting for their freedom by blowing up stuff in Japan.
Yep. Yeah. So it said retaliation for Cardassia, Andoria, Kronos, Vulcan, and Romulus. So must have been other battles at those different planets. Yeah. And then Raffi
also we learned that Picard from Harvey, because Picard is still like, where is Laris? And and Harvey tells him, we've never had a Laris on staff here. She's never been one of our slaves.
Right.
And then he does some memory checking, which causes his eyes to go weird. And then he says, oh, but you did kill a Laris and her husband Siobhan at the gates of Romulus. Would you like me to show you victory images of their dead bodies? I know you'd like that.
Yeah. And Picard has to be stern, but then Raffi shows up there as Elnor's running away, and she's the chief of police. So she arrests Elnor and takes him to Seven for interrogation, supposedly. But of course, that later changes. So this is how Raffi and Elnor get pulled back in with the rest of the crew. And
it's a little uncomfortable for Elnor with his total candor, and she's just like, go with it, baby.
Yeah. I like the interaction between Raffi and Elnor in this episode.
She's got a fun, very motherly interaction with him.
And Elnor is obviously very comfortable with her as well, and it's a lot of fun. There's a couple of scenes that are pretty good. And then finally, the last one, we got Agnes. She's got her pet cat Spot 73. So it's taken her 73 times to recreate Spot, apparently.
Yeah, he's a little animation that's voiced by Patton Oswalt. Yep. And he lives in like looks kind of like a picture frame.
Yeah.
But he's a little animation of a cat. He refers to himself as a domesticant.
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Of course, that comes up later about her, her always wanting to make, pet, AI pets and whatever. One thing she says is, she accidentally calls Seven instead of Annika, or president, in it because they were in college together and she was Annika Seven Shots.
Yeah, so they were drinking buddies in college is the cover story that she uses to explain why she instantly called President Hansen Seven when they met in front of her factotum husband.
Yeah, and Agnes is rather interesting as she's trying to explain all this. I don't think she breathes in some of those, but
yeah. Incidentally, the cat Spot character is he doesn't really add much to the story, but he does suggest that in this timeline, Agnes is a bit of a rebel. She's kind of, because he's talking to her as she's like waking up. The Spot character is talking to her and commenting on social conditions and how people are too into Eradication Day. And he's talking to her in a way that could be construed as seditious.
Right.
And so that, since he's programmed by alternate Agnes, that would suggest alternate Agnes is in some degree not on board with the totalitarian stuff.
Right.
Because otherwise she wouldn't let her AI talk sedition to her.
Right, exactly. Which is kind of interesting because she's in the position to, I'm assuming, study and definitely guard the Borg Queen, the last remaining member of the collective that is to be executed. So it's interesting that she's in that position when she really is kind of a, like you said, she's kind of a quiet rebel. So
so this is a good point then to talk about the Borg Queen. So apparently the entire Borg collective has been destroyed except for the last queen. And actually, if you, it goes by really quickly, but if you pause the frame, that picture over Picard's desk in his office is not just of the World Raiser. It's of the World Raiser firing in multiple directions on a Borg cube that has been torn in half. And so Picard has had a lead position in destroying the Borg collective, and now it's down to her. And this Borg Queen is interesting. The makeup is a little bit different. It's a little more alien.
Absolutely.
It's not as seductive. It's kind of harsher makeup a little bit. And she has this quirky, jerky performance.
Yeah,
the actress does. She acts very rattled, and you could understand if she's a queen that's been seen her collective destroyed and is no longer in communication with it. That's going to rattle you. She talks in this way that is sometimes coherent, but sometimes it's not. And she's saying random things. Like one of the things that she keeps saying, she says it several times, and I'm thinking it's going to come back and have significance in the future. But she several times says she has a splinter in her flesh. And I don't know what that means, but she says it more than once. I don't know who she's talking about or what the splinter is, but I'm guessing that we'll get some more on that. What her performance reminds me of is the hybrid in Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, sure.
The hybrid was a part human, part cyborg entity, a woman that slept in a tank of goo and ran all of the essential functions on the Cylon base stars. And she would talk in this stream of consciousness, poetic, disconnected way, suggesting that she's in communication with or is operating on some higher, weirder level that we can't comprehend. And the Borg Queen's performance in this reminded me a lot of the hybrid. And it's similar in that she's also biomechanical and has things connecting her to other things like the hybrid, and she's not complete. Just like you never saw the hybrid's legs. You only saw her torso poking out of the goo. And here, the Borg Queen is basically a torso. She has no legs or arms because they've taken those away from her.
Yeah, I like the way the Borg Queen was portrayed. I mean, at least when she was in the laboratory there, it was very, like you said, manic at some points, and then calm and almost, I don't know how you'd put it, but, very almost satisfied sometimes when she's talking too,
kind of smug.
And smug. That's a good way to put it. And so it's very, very interesting. One thing that we find out is that Borg Queens have some kind of temporal connection to other Borg Queens in other universes. And so this is part of the reason why she's almost insane, is because she recognizes that time has split, that something has changed in time, that time is broken, as she says, and helps them to figure out when the split occurred, which is 2024 Los Angeles.
And she also mentions there being a watcher there to assist them. And I don't know that it will be, but part of me wonders if the watcher is going to be Guinan.
Right. Yeah. It will be interesting to see how they play that out. And you're probably right. I mean, that would probably make the most sense, since we know that Guinan was supposedly on Earth in the 19th century. So likely she could be on the 21st century as well. One thing that sorry. Oh, no.
One thing I was going to mention before we move on from the destruction of the Borg is Picard, the factotum husband, says that General Picard has petitioned for the title Borg Slayer. And this is something that I don't know if the writers are aware of it. I assume they are, but that actually goes back to the Roman Empire.
Sure.
What would happen is if a general had a great victory, he would sometimes be allowed to take the name of the people he conquered on behalf of the Empire. And so, so you had Claudius's father was named, the Emperor Claudius's father was called Germanicus because he conquered the Germans. And one of Claudius's sons, the biological one, not the adopted Nero, was named Britannicus because Claudius had conquered the Britons.
Oh, sure.
And so this getting to name yourself after this or have a title after your great conquest is something that actually has roots in history. And so it made sense to me that Picard would have a title in a universe like this that's kind of based on the Roman Empire of Borg Slayer.
And I wonder if that was conscious, because there's other things, especially in the Elimination Day show, if you will, that kind of call back to a Roman Empire, stereotypical Roman Empire, scenery dressing and everything. So I wonder if that was kind of a conscious choice. Like
the execution of the Borg Queen. So after the Jewish War of AD 66 to 70 plus, the Romans, what they would do is they wouldn't kill everybody. They would take like some of the leaders and some of the captives they got in war and bring them back to Rome and parade them publicly. And then at the end of the parade, they would kill some of them. So, for example, one of the key Jewish rebels was Simon Bar Giora. And by the way, if you're ever rebelling against the Roman Empire, just pro tip, if you're ever rebelling against the Roman Empire and they have sealed you up in Jerusalem and are surrounding and besieging you, do not burn your own grain supply. Okay? Bad move. Do not burn your own grain supply. That will not actually help you. But there was factional division in Jerusalem with these like three rebel leaders, one of whom was Simon Bar Giora, and he ended up surviving the war itself, only to be taken back to Rome and paraded around. And then they took him to the top of the Tarpeian Rock, which is a feature on the Capitoline Hill in Rome. It's a big, tall thing. And in the 12 tables, there are prescriptions for if you do certain crimes, you're executed by being hurled from the Tarpeian Rock. So they brought Simon Bar Giora back to Rome, parade him around, big triumph for the generals Vespasian, who's now emperor, and his son Titus, who conducted the final stage of the siege of Jerusalem. And we've got Simon Bar Giora here. He's totally humiliated. We've also got the menorah from the temple, and we're showing that around, and we get Simon Bar Giora up to the top of the Tarpeian Rock, and poof, off he goes. This is executing your enemies publicly is something that also has roots in human history.
Yeah, that is interesting. I didn't know that about the execution. That's pretty interesting. One thing the Borg Queen does is when Seven walks into the room, immediately identifies her as tertiary adjunct of Unimatrix Zero, which of course Seven's full name was 7 of 9 tertiary adjunct of Unimatrix Zero, but then also identifies her as Annika Hansen, who escaped assimilation.
Yeah.
So you had a combination of both those, sees both of them. But of course, they're there for the elimination.
She asks tertiary adjunct of Unimatrix Zero to help her.
Exactly. So, but of course they're there for the Elimination Day, and Annika's husband comes in to get her off to the performance. So the crew split. We got Raffi and Elnor going to lower the transporter block, which has been put up, of course, right at the last minute as they're ready to transport everybody out, including the Borg Queen. And then Girardi is going to...
So there's this moment where they're about to beam up to La Sirena and then go fly around the sun. And as we mentioned, they're bringing the Borg Queen because they need someone who can do all the necessary calculations since they don't have Spock there.
Right.
And so they start to beam out and it doesn't work. And it turns out that this is because, well, it's Eradication Day and there's extra security for the facility where they're doing this. So they have a screen to prevent beaming. They then take out communications for the same reason. And it's not that the La Sirena gang has been detected. It's just these are the security precautions for Eradication Day. And they were mentioned in the presidential briefing that Seven got.
Yeah. And so, yeah, they've got the block. And again, it's always the last second. It's always just as they're about ready to do it, it happens. And so, like I said, Raffi and Elnor are going to remove that temporarily. Jurati is working to break through the communication block that's there so that they can communicate with La Sirena and beam out. And then Seven and Picard go to do the show to cover for them until the time is ready. And it's, they come out, of course, this is a big performance. Seven goes up and gives a speech, and there's a line. She goes, "Witness what awaits rebellion, insurrection," and then pauses, "resistance." And it's kind of interesting, it's significant that she pauses at that moment as she's saying that speech, because, of course, the famous Borg, "Resistance is futile." Well, now the humans are using that as part of their confederation. Resistance is futile.
Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, I wanted to mention there is a great moment just before the speech begins where they're all the La Sirena gang are down in Agnes's lab where the Borg Queen is, and the factotum husband comes in. And he's like, "What are you all doing here?" Because it's this very implausible situation where it's like, okay, we've got the president down here with her main general and her college drinking buddy, maybe, with the head of security and a Romulan spy terrorist all around the Borg Queen when we're about to execute the Borg Queen. What is going on here? This looks very suspicious. And so he's clearly suspecting them. And he says, "What are you doing?" And Seven and Picard don't know what to say. And out of nowhere, Agnes starts blathering this explanation she's made up on the spot that totally makes sense of everything. And it's like, wow, Agnes is a super fast, super good liar. And it's funny. She just reels this stuff off and just blurts it all out. And it makes total sense of the data in a non-suspicious way. And it goes by so fast, no one can really follow it. And they're all just kind of stunned. And the factotum husband just is like, okay. And
it's time to go.
and then as soon as Agnes is alone, she just like collapses. She didn't know she had that in her.
Yeah, that's right. It comments where it's almost like she doesn't breathe. She just rambles off about this Romulan spy or supposed Romulan spy the Queen knew about, and this, that, and the other thing. Turns out it was bogus. And the reason why I called her Seven, because she was Annika 7 shots, and it just da 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 da. And he just kind of looks at her like, well, okay, well, it's time to go.
Yeah.
It was clever, and again, very well done by the actress to just rattle it off that quickly. I'd love to see some of the outtakes of that scene.
Yeah,
because I'm sure there are plenty where it didn't quite work as well. So they're out. Picard and Seven are out on the stage, and Picard's pumping up the crowd. He's doing the fist pumps and raise the roof and all that,
which is stalling, but it actually works in context because he's got this rabid crowd who are there to see the Borg Queen executed, and if you're being vicious and evil, you want to draw that out. You don't just want to zap her. And so to make it satisfying, he's drawn it out. And
a little too long.
But it's a little too long, and the crowd gets impatient and starts calling for him to execute her, and they start turning on him. And I'm wondering, what is Picard going to do? And eventually he says to Seven, "We may have to fight."
Yep.
And in the background, everybody else is on task. Agnes has temporarily punched through the communications blackout and talked to Rios, but then she loses it and has to rebuild it again. Raffi and Elnor have gone to the security area where they have the force field that's blocking transport. And this is a really interesting scene because Raffi brings in Elnor, who is handcuffed, and she says, "This guy, is a Romulan terrorist. He just did bad stuff. I brought him here to security as a little present. Merry Christmas," and shoves Elnor towards them, and they start beating Elnor up. And this is the distraction, them beating Elnor up while she focuses her attention on the computers to try to bring down the transportation. And eventually one of the other aides who's in security, because she's security chief, one of the other aides in security realizes she's taken down the force field. And she's like, what are you doing? And Raffi says, Elnor, they're yours. And all of a sudden, instead of being passive and taking the beating, Elnor, still handcuffed, starts kicking their butts.
Oh, big time.
And so we realize he's just been holding back this entire time.
Yeah.
And he's leaping and he's kicking people and he's slamming their heads into things. And at one point, one of the designers, there's an interview with one of the designers I saw part of where they said we thought it would be interesting to make these comm badges that they're wearing be more than standard comm badges.
Okay.
That they're actually weapons. They've got a sharp edge so you can use them like throwing stars. And one of the security officers uses his comm badge or her comm badge as a throwing star and pitches it at Elnor, who ducks out of the way so it impacts the chest of another security officer. And Elnor, with his hands tied together, then takes the throwing star comm badge out of the guy's chest and slashes his throat with it.
Yeah.
And so Elnor is just incredibly in charge of this situation as soon as Raffi tells him he can take charge, and he does.
Yep. Yeah, I missed that it was the comm badge. I saw the throwing star and I missed that it was the comm badge. That is actually a pretty clever idea for a species or for a totalitarian government like this to have that. Mm-hmm. So that was good design. But of course, at the last minute, they all get beamed up. They get it all figured out and get beamed up to La Sirena. I wanted to say in the execution scene, I wish they had found a way to communicate this. But having been assimilated by the Borg, and the Borg Queen even identifies Picard as your Locutus, but not now. It must have been Jean-Luc Picard must have had amazing internal feelings of being there in the position to kill the Borg Queen and end the Borg collective in this timeline. Right. I mean, how much part of him must have wanted to do that, but yet he couldn't because they need her, and also because Federation morality. And I wish they could have brought out that internal conflict that Jean-Luc Picard as a character must have been feeling in that moment where he had the ability to end the collective. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of surprised they didn't. I'm surprised they didn't say something, whether part of Seven's speech or Picard himself, or, because they're pretty good about talking about feelings in these shows nowadays. So I'm kind of surprised they didn't. But
oh, by the way, speaking of having your neck slit with a comm badge, 25th century medicine, don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. they can fix it. They can fix anything short of death, and even that I think they can bring back too. But yeah, they get beamed up at the last minute, and then they act like they're in a big hurry to get out of there, but they don't go to warp.
I know.
And
it's like, dude,
they walk around and
step one, go to warp anywhere, but go to warp.
Find some place between the stars and hang out while you do the calculations, and then do it. But then the magistrate, the first husband, overrides using the presidential override and beams up to capture them. The last that he's going to get the traitor Picard. Which, it's kind of like, well, this is why you got to be in a big hurry so that he can't do that. You got to get at least out of range of transporters.
Yeah. And the first thing he does when he beams on board is shoots Elnor. So to get that guy out of action first. Well,
Elnor moved right to him or was moving towards him. That's why he got shot. So, and that's where we end. The crew is captured and to be continued. So anything else from you, Jimmy?
Nope. Okay. Well, I will note that they've got the Borg Queen in this stasis thing, although she's not frozen, but she's in this kind of, I don't know what you'd call it. It's kind of like a baby carriage basket thing, only for a Borg Queen. And it's clear that they're using anti-gravity because Agnes is pushing it around like it weighs nothing.
Right.
And as she's pushing the Borg Queen back towards the central computer access point on the La Sirena, there's a significant exchange of glances between the Borg Queen and Agnes. And Agnes is clearly a little bit uncomfortable with this, while the Borg Queen is just very serene. And so they're portending that something is going to happen between Agnes and the Borg Queen. And it could be any number of things. A simple thing would be she's going to try to assimilate her. But since they just explained that Agnes got off of killing her previous boyfriend because of temporary alien-induced mental insanity, that's not the good writing choice here. So no. I suspect they're going to do something else, at least in the short term.
Yeah, exactly. That was kind of interesting scene. I mean, I like the camera work where you're looking up at the Queen and she's just looking down again, very serenely, almost smugly, just kind of hanging out there. Mm-hmm. So I enjoyed this episode. I think this was actually a pretty good episode all in all. It moved pretty well and it was very interesting.
I like it much better than if it had just been, let's immediately go back to the 21st century. Right. We need to see this totalitarian world in order to understand why it needs to be destroyed. The same way that, like in Lord of the Rings, we need to see the Shire and how good it is in order to understand why it needs to be saved.
Right. Exactly. So, well, we have some feedback, as I said at the beginning of the show. First one, and both of them are from our recent conversation on Star Trek Generations, the movie Star Trek Generations. So the first one comes from our regular feedback contributor, Bennett Gillespie on Facebook. Great show. One mini fact that I found interesting is that an uncredited crew member is Patricia Tallman, who is, a lot of people know of Lyra from Babylon 5. Mm-hmm. She was there because she was Leah. She was there because, as well as acting crew member, she was a stunt woman and is the body double for Crusher falling from the ship rather than Gates. Can't be unseen once known. Yeah, and Patricia Tallman actually shows up through both TNG and DS9 quite a bit, a few times anyways. Yeah,
she works or has worked as a stunt woman rather extensively, including on science fiction shows. And I'm always on the lookout. You see a tall, thin, redheaded woman in the background, and I'm always, is that Pat Tallman? And sometimes she gets a speaking part, which is nice. Often on Star Trek under layers of latex face makeup, but she does show up, and anytime you have a stunt involving a tall, thin redhead, good chance it's going to be Patricia Tallman.
Yeah. So she shows up quite a bit. It's pretty interesting. So thanks for that, Bennett. And then our second one is from Chris Shortelli via email. He says he just became a patron. He wants to compliment all of us,
Yay.
Dom, Jimmy, and Father Cory, on an excellent podcast. He says he also enjoys Mysterious World, as does his 12-year-old son, Ryan.
Awesome.
His 11-year-old, Zach, someday too. He just hears them listen to it now. Mm-hmm. Regarding your recent Generations review and discussion, agree pretty much with all of your points. I would add my biggest criticism of the movie, how it handled in-universe Kirk's second death. Next Gen initially tried to portray Kirk as just another captain in The Naked Now, and then later when Spock and Scotty appeared, it was acknowledged that Kirk and crew were legends. So at the end of the movie, how is there not a scene or speech by Picard to Riker about how he met the famous James T. Kirk, or even some kind of funeral scene? Anything? There's no reference. There's nothing.
Yeah.
Instead, the emotion in the final moments is reserved for his cat. I was so disappointed. So
for Data's cat, yeah. There has been significant criticism of the end of Generations as the send off of Captain Kirk, and yeah, I think it could have been. I would be interested to explore how it could have been handled differently, because, and they actually did go back, as we mentioned, and reshoot the ending, because originally Malcolm McDowell killed him. And this was viewed as not being heroic enough. And so they went back and redid part of the ending, and they were thus working around footage they already had. And they may not have been able to have a new scene with Riker talking about it. But it would be interesting to think through how it could have been better handled without completely changing the energy dynamic of moving into the emotional energy dynamic of moving into mourning and then ending up letting the audience feel good. I mean, they did that at the end of Wrath of Khan, where we did have a funeral scene, but then because of the Genesis Nebula, we had a way to make the audience feel good with the "I feel young" line, and gazing out at this glorious new creation before them, and then zoom in, and there's Spock's coffin, and we know we're coming back. This is not the end. But if you don't have that to make the audience feel good at the end, how do you handle the grief issue if you dwell too much on it?
Right. And he kind of makes a comment of how did Picard drag Shatner up that mountain to bury him? Did he have help?
Strapped into his back and rappelled his way up. I did free face rock climbing.
Maybe Picard is stronger than we think he is, but than he looks. Second point he makes, Starfleet doesn't know about the Borg until Q sends the Enterprise in the Delta Quadrant. But does that mean none of the refugees in Generations ever mentioned the Borg? Also, how did Guinan end up on 19th century Earth in Time's Arrow, then as a refugee on 23rd century Earth in Generations? I really wish they had integrated the two crews and had that be the movie. A huge missed opportunity. Yeah,
and Ron Moore and his co-writer wanted to integrate the two crews and have them all be major players, and they just couldn't find a way to make it work. In terms of how is she on 19th century Earth and then a refugee in the 23rd century? I don't think that's a problem, because she's from a spacefaring species that lives for centuries. And so she was on 19th century Earth, and then at some point she went back to her home planet, and maybe after the 21st century. She went back to her own planet, and it got attacked by the Borg, and she was a refugee in the 23rd century. So I don't see a problem there, but I do see a big problem with Starfleet's knowledge of the Borg, because the idea we've got these refugees and we don't even know what led to them being refugees is nonsense. Right. The idea that all the Elarians wouldn't talk about the Borg is crazy. They've done nothing to establish that. So Starfleet should know about the Borg from Picard or from Kirk's time onward, and they apparently don't. Now, what you might do is headcanon that or retcon it to say, well, yeah, Starfleet has known about them, and it's been so classified because it's so scary that the crew of the Enterprise, including Picard, had not been briefed on them.
Sure.
But that wouldn't be very satisfying, because actually they had been building up to the appearance of the Borg, with the Borg scooping up cities on both sides of the Romulan neutral zone. And that would have led to, let's check the records and see if there's anything that could account for this.
It's right next to the records of the Discovery from the 23rd century. So, I mean, Star Trek or Starfleet has a good record keeping, that they can keep things so secret people don't even know it's there. So I guess, apparently. But like you said, that's not a very satisfying answer, and it wasn't for Discovery either. So
yeah, it comes off as a big plot hole.
Yeah. So as we conclude, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the secrets of Star Trek, including Charles W., Albert A., Scott H., Laurent S., and Dan F. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edits this show every week. So that's it from us. What did you think of Penance, the second episode of the second season of Picard? Let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, or our Facebook page at facebook.com/starquestmedia, or send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the next new episode of Picard. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, and I would say a safe galaxy is a human galaxy, but that's too creepy, so live long and prosper.
Yeah, I prefer that one as well. And once again, I'm Father Cory Sticha. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, I thought I really must see Jean-Luc, and so I simply sought out the nearest explosion.